morning, everybody. We have the last part of the story of Aeneas that we're going to be reading today. So this is part 4 of the Aeneid in this retelling of it in Classic Myths to Read Aloud. You read the story of Aeneas and Queen Dido in the last chapter. So on last Friday, you were reading that with Mrs. Campbell. So we are going to continue hearing about Aeneas's voyage as he enters the lower world or the underworld, like hell. So he's going to be entering Hades, which is called Hades in this as well, just like in Greek mythology. So a little background on it. It says, although the story in the Aeneid goes on to tell of Aeneas's eventual conquering of the tribes that inhabited Italy, the following tale of his journey to Hades provides a colorful and imaginative point of departure. Virgil's vision of how earthly lives are punished or rewarded after death was intended to encourage his readers towards moral behavior. So he was kind of writing about how terrible it was just to make people behave better. Whether it had that result is unknown, but the images that he created in this vision have been recreated by other writers for centuries and are the basis for many references and allusions today. So this is one of the visuals of Hades that you'll see in lots of other books and movies. So this was, once again, mainly used to make people feel like, oh, I better shape up so that I can get to either like this version of heaven or at least not the lowest level, as you'll see in the story. Now, the storm that Aeneas and the Trojans encountered after leaving Carthage raged for several days, buffeting the ships about and washing huge waves across the decks. In the darkest hours of the tempest, Aeneas's aged father, Anchises, died in his sleep. And Aeneas, overcome with grief, embraced his father's lifeless body and wept uncontrollably for many hours. When at last the storm abated, Aeneas ordered the ships to depart from their original course and to put in at the nearby island of Sicily, so that Anchises could be given a proper burial. Once on the shore, Aeneas called his people together and said, "This is a day that I shall always keep in sorrow and in reverence, and it is fitting that we celebrate it with proper rites," which is like the systems of doing something, like the traditions. And so they built a tomb for Anchises, and then proceeded to honor him in the manner that befitted great men of the time. They all crowned their heads with myrtle wreaths and had held a great feast. And then they joined in athletic contests featuring ship races and tests of running, boxing, and archery skill. Swords and garments and jewels were given as prizes to the winners, and these funeral games went on for 9 days. So on the last night of the celebration, which is like honoring this person's life, as Aeneas slept soundly in his tent, he was visited by the ghost of his father in a dream. Aeneas heard his father say to him, "My son, the great Jove wishes me to tell you many things about your journey to Italy, but first you must visit me where I dwell, in Pluto's dark domains." And Pluto is another word for Hades. Fear not, and obviously also what Pluto, the dwarf planet, is named after. "Fear not that I am tortured with the evildoers, for I am at peace in Elysium, in the company of the blessed." So he is in basically like a version of heaven, he's saying. "The Sibyl will show you how to find me, and then you shall learn of your glorious future and of the city you are to build. Till then, my son, farewell." So he's supposed to go down to Hades, where Pluto lives, and he's going to hear about how to find his father and to learn about the glorious future and the city he's about to build. Now the vision and the dreams vanished like smoke into the air, and Aeneas awoke with a start. He called to him his friends and captains, and he told them about what Jove had commanded him to do. Straightway they set sail for the land of Cumi, where the Sibyl, who had the power to disclose the future, lived in a dark and hidden cave near the temple of Apollo. And when their boats were anchored at last along the shore, several of the Trojans went into the forest to cut firewood and to find fresh water. Others hunted for whatever game the countryside might provide. Aeneas, though, went alone to find the cave of the Sibyl. He located Apollo's temple easily enough, and as he stared at it, wondering which direction to go next, he heard a strange voice, or voices, perhaps, nearby, and he walked on to see from what source they were coming. All of a sudden, he was at the mouth of a cave that was cut out of solid rock, and as he stepped just inside, he could see that it was very deep and spacious, with 100 doors, out of which rushed the many voices of the Sibyl. Though his knees trembled and cold shudders ran through his bones, Aeneas offered a prayer to the prophetess, saying, "O great Sibyl, grant me the power to descend to the lower regions and to hear the message that is intended for my ears, and my people will honor thee forever." The 100 doors flew open with a blast, and a voice from each bellowed a reply. "Son of Anchises, it is easy to go down to the land of the shades, but to retrace one's steps and reach the upper air again, this is not so light a task." So it's easy enough to go down. You can't come back up very easily, though. Only few have done it. And we saw Psyche do it, actually, in the story of Cupid and Psyche, if you remember. But if you are still of a mind to try, listen to my words. There lies hidden in the forest a bow of gold, which is sacred to Proserpine, the queen of the dead, who we saw once again with Cupid and Psyche. No one can go upon this journey unless he brings with him this bow as a gift for the queen. All the doors suddenly slammed shut. So he's supposed to bring this gift to Queen Proserpine, or Proserpine is the way we say it. And an eerie silence was all that filled the deep, dark cave. Now Aeneas searched the forest high and low, but could find nothing like a bow of gold. Then a pair of doves swooped down from the sky and settled on some grassy turf near where Aeneas was walking. Almost in despair, he called to them, "If only you could be my guides, for with your lofty view, you must know where this golden bough is hidden." Then the birds rose into the air and circled Aeneas's head several times before flying very slowly ahead of him. He followed their lead, and within minutes they alighted upon the tree that bore the golden bough. So instead of it being a branch with leaves or flowers or fruit on it, it's golden, actually. Now, Aeneas gave thanks to the gods for sending these guiding doves, similar to the pigeons that led Curti's mother. Aeneas gave thanks to the god for sending these guiding doves. Then he quickly broke off the glittering branch and returned to the Sibyl's cave, glad of heart that he now had the means to gain the favor of the queen of the dead. When Aeneas arrived back at the Sibyl's abode, she appeared to him in her own womanly form, and she asked again whether he was certain that he wanted to go on. Aeneas replied that he was duty-bound to hear his father's message, and so the Sibyl led him into the deepest reaches of the cave, past a gloomy lake from which deadly vapors arose. They continued on deeper and deeper into the cave and into the earth. The path was steep and rocky, and the footing was uncertain. All about them there was gloom and silence. In the dim light of the single torch the Sibyl carried, shadows looked like contorted faces. And the rocks protruding from the walls of the passageway seemed like arms jutting out to snatch at Aeneas as he passed. After a great while, they came to the gates of Hades, where the figures of grief and remorse lay sleeping on their beds. There also Aeneas could see the shapes of fear and hunger, forms so horrible that he had to turn his eyes away. Now Gorgons and Harpies and all manner of monsters roamed about the entrance, breathing fire and screeching and gnashing their teeth. So scary monsters. Aeneas drew his sword and would have rushed at them had the Sibyl not assured him that they were but airy apparitions. So it's almost like a ghost. They're not actually real. Ferocious, but without substance. Passing through the gates, they reached a wide stream where a ferryman, called Charon, stood on the deck of his rusty boat, leaning on a pole. Upon the bank were throngs of souls, wives and mothers, men of war, boys and girls, as thick as leaves that fell to the earth at the first frost of autumn, and all stood stretching out their hands and calling to the ferryman to take them across to the other side. This is completely made up, really trying to scare people into being better, because these people were wanting to get to the other side. Now Aeneas was moved by this sight, and he turned to the Sibyl, saying, "O lady, tell me who are these spirits, and what do they seek?" And the Sibyl replied, "This is the river Styx." and those you see are souls whose bodies have been unburied on earth. So they thought it was very important to bury a body, and basically, like, these people are just kind of roaming around because they actually haven't been buried. It is not permitted for spirits to be delivered to their rightful place in the underworld until their bones have been laid to rest. And so they wander. It's like they don't have a home. They wander to and fro along the shores for 100 years before they are allowed to cross. Now, Aeneas's heart was touched with pity at their sad fortune as he and the Sibyl pressed on through the crowd toward the ferry boat. At this time, I think it was, and still most people are buried after they have died, but it was especially important, and this is probably either the reason for that, or maybe this came already out of the tradition that it was so important to have someone buried. So when Charon saw them coming, he reached out in an angry voice, "Stay back, whoever you are, for this is the abode of ghosts, and no living soul can cross in my boat." But the Sibyl held up the golden bough for the ferryman to see, and he was amazed to behold this marvelous gift, and he laid his anger aside. Without a word more, he brought his boat near the bank, and driving out the ghosts that sat in crowds upon its benches, he took on board Aeneas and the Sibyl. The boat, accustomed only to the light freight of bodiless spirits, groaned under the weight of these living souls. Obviously, they're human solid bodies rather than a ghost. But soon it reached the opposite shore. Here Aeneas beheld another gate, and stretching in front of it lay three-headed Cerberus, the watchdog of Hades. Some of you probably already know what he's like. The air resounded with the fierce barking from his triple throats. He's a three-headed dog. And the Sibyl, to quiet him, flung him a cake of honey and poppy seeds, which would drug him into a sound sleep. Very smart. Mad with hunger, Cerberus tore at the morsel with his three mouths, and soon his limbs relaxed, and he stretched himself out before the gate, wrapped in the arms of Morpheus, the god of dreams. Aeneas bounded from the ferry boat out upon the shore from which no one could hope to return. As he pressed on through the gate, he could hear the crying of the ghosts of young children who had died before their lives had scarcely begun. Here, too, were the souls of those who, being tired of life, had sought death by their own hands, and now were wishing they might return to earth again. So they killed themselves and are wanting to get back to earth. They wish they hadn't. Nearby, amid groves of myrtle, were the souls of those who had died of love, and among those were, can you guess who? Queen Dido. That's the reason she died, because of her love for Aeneas, whom Aeneas could see faintly through the shadows. Tears came rushing to his eyes as he called to her, "Dido, can it be you? Oh, beautiful queen! And can it be, then, that it was I who sent you here? As the gods are my witness, I beg you to believe that I did not wish to leave you, but my duty gave me no other course." Which is true. He didn't want to leave her, but he had to. He was really told by the gods to. But she, standing for a moment with her eyes cast to the ground, set her heart against him and abruptly walked away. She is not over it. The Sibyl took him by the hand and led him to a place where the path parted into two roads. "The one on the right," she said, "leads to Pluto's palace and to the Elysian fields. But on the left lies the path to Tartarus, where the wicked of the world are punished for their crimes." Now Aeneas peered down the road on the left and saw in the distance a high wall with a river of flames licking at it from below. He could hear a din of deep groans and cracking whips and dragging chains coming from behind the wall, and he asked the Sibyl to tell him their meaning. She answered him, saying, "The feet of the righteous may not pass down that road, but Proserpine has told me of the terrors that are contained within those walls." And the prophetess described to Aeneas the many torments that there afflict those who had done the deepest wrongs to their fellow men on earth. Among the tortures was that of Sisyphus, who maybe you've heard his story. He was the cruel king of Corinth, whose task was to roll a huge stone up a hill, but when the top was nearly reached, the rock would just rush headlong down to the plain again. And so he toiled and toiled. He worked and worked at this, while the sweat bathed his weary limbs, but it was always to no effect. Every time he pushed it up, it would just come right down on him, which sounds like torture. There too was Tantalus, who was another wicked king, who was condemned for all time to stand in a pool, his chin level with the water. Yet he was always parched with thirst, so he was surrounded by water but couldn't drink it. For when he bowed his head to drink, the water receded. Tall trees laden with luscious fruit stooped their branches to him, but just when he reached for their treasures, a sudden wind would raise the branch just above his grasp. So once again, the author of the story is intending this to be like an eternal punishment for these people for their wrongdoings. And the intention is he wants to scare the readers into doing better things so that they don't have punishments like this. There were other torments too that were even harsher, but all had in common that they would endure forever and ever without pause, nor was there any hope for those who suffered. So it's just always going to be terrible for them. Now the Sibyl then advised Aeneas that it was time for him to turn his attention toward the abodes of the blessed, and she led him down the path on the right until they reached the fields of Elysium. Here the air is pure, the skies are bright, and the green of springtime abounds. Some of the happy souls could be seen exercising on the grassy lawn, while others joined in dance and song. Here Aeneas could see kings of old who had died for their country, so they're brave people down here, and priests, and those who had improved the world with their inventions, and those whose worthy deeds had lessened the suffering on earth. So the people that were placed here were better in some way. They had done some sort of heroic deed or good for the world. Now, across a shining plain, he beheld Anchises, who stretched his arm out toward his son, tears of joy streaming down his cheeks. Aeneas wrapped his own arms around his father in a loving embrace, but found that he was embracing a phantom or ghost. There was no actual substance within his encircling grasp. Anchises then, with a knowing look, comforted his son and assured him that his happiness was not diminished just because his mortal body had been left on earth. They walked along together, and Aeneas asked Anchises to identify the souls they met and to explain why so many were gathered on the bank of the peaceful river that flowed gently across the plain. These souls, Anchises answered, all seek to live again in a mortal body. They drink from the river Lethe, whose waters bring about forgetfulness, and thus they lose all memory of the past and may return to the world above in another human form. Anchises then went on to tell Aeneas and the Sibyl all the events that the future held for his son and the race that would be founded by the people of Troy. This is what he came down for, remember. He showed them visions of how Aeneas would land in Italy and conquer the tribes who dwelt there, and to give them laws and order. The great nation Aeneas would found there would have many heroes and in time would rule the world with imperial sway. Now, this story is written after Rome had already conquered many nations around it. So this author, Virgil, he's crafting this story to basically predict what would happen to Rome. He told them of Romulus, the founder of the city on 7 hills, also of Brutus, who we know, the avenger of his country's wrongs, and of the line of Caesars, who would plant the Roman way in every foreign land. And this was written at the time of Caesar Augustus. Now, Anchises says, all this, my son, will come to your children's children. So it's going to be hundreds of years later. Other civilizations may create great works of art, and some may devote themselves to science, he said. But the work of the nation you shall found is to conquer the world, to set the rule to peace, which we know Caesar Augustus is known for the time of the Pax Romana, the peaceful era. Also, was going to be to spare the humble and to subdue the proud. It's a lot that they're expecting Rome to do. Conquer the world, set the rule of peace, spare the humble, meaning be kind to the people who are humble and not punish them, and to subdue the proud, basically make it so that they are not proud anymore. And so it came to pass, just as Anchises had said. Aeneas conquered the tribes of Italy and brought them under the rule of law. Ascanius ruled the land after him, and his children after him. And Romulus eventually founded the greatest city of all on the banks of Tiber, and its armies conquered the world and brought about a peace that would know no end. Thus did the seeds of Troy take root and flower in the Roman Empire. So that's the end of the Aeneid, and really ends at the founding of Rome. This whole legend of how the Trojans, including the bravest of them all, Aeneas, really started the whole Roman Empire. He was maybe great-great-great-great-grandfather of Romulus, but remember that Romulus is also just a legend. These are all fictional characters, but the very, very famous story of the Aeneid. So that is the most famous Roman epic of all time. So it's very similar to, once again, the Odyssey and the Iliad. It's just the Roman version of it. So I hope you've enjoyed. This is the last of our Friday myths that we'll be doing. We may eventually do some Native American mythology, but this is the majority of what we're going to be doing for mythology for the year. So I'll talk to you all later. If you've got some questions to answer once you're done with this video. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye.